we shape our communication process with the client to match them and their needs. So if a client likes to text, we'll text. If it's email communication, we email. We always back everything up with email and documentation to make sure that everybody on the team is on the same page. But we adjust our schedule and our pacing and our processes to meet their needs. Some clients have a super short attention span. And it's like, hey, you got me for 45 minutes and then my brain's going to shut off and I got to go do something else. Other ones are like, hey, I'm going to be in town for like 3 days. We got to knock out like as much as we possibly can. And then I'm going to be gone for the next 4 months.
Well, welcome to the podcast, Blake.
How you doing today, Brad?
Good. Blake Sutton is the president and owner of Est Est, and you guys are a design firm that's been around a long time. I know we'll get to your story, and I'm really excited about this episode. Blake and I go way back, all the way back to his college days.
Yes, sir. Back in Monte Lucia.
Yeah. So a little for those that listen to the podcast and know me, they know kind of my career started at Monte Lucia. That was really kind of the turning point for me, working on that amazing hotel. And Blake at the time was studying construction management at ASU.
Yep.
And your dad had, taken over Est Est many years ago and built an incredible design firm. And you got to come get the construction experience and then ended up bringing it back to the family, which is pretty awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't originally plan to go into interior design. I always wanted to run a small business, and the construction industry always interested me. And so Monte Lucia was a great place working with Roland, getting started and learning the ropes and taking on experience and responsibility pretty early on.
Well, maybe we'll start here, Blake. What's interesting about your background is that, some of the most successful design firms we work with, they're designers that have a lot of knowledge of the construction process, right? I think any business, the more you understand other businesses, the more successful you can be. So I've been very passionate about, working with designers, as you know, and learning their business and learning how they operate and how they're profitable and their pain points and, all the emotional journey aspects of their business, because, as a partner, it allows us to be like better, right? I think and there's a lot of application for me as well.
Well, you go to school and they talk about, win-win relationships, but the reality is for us to be successful, we need to make sure that all of our partners on the project and the client are successful also. So us understanding what causes problems and what allows people to be successful is really important as we kind of create our processes.
Yeah. And so as you look back for you, Blake, specifically, I think what's unique for you is even though I'll give you credit. You guys have always produced one of the best design books. For those that listen, they know there's Luann Nigera. She's a big podcaster and is huge in the design world. And I've always spoken to her about these A+ design books. And really the credibility goes back to you guys. That was kind of my first taste of design and what you produce there. But before we get into that, maybe personally, how do you feel that the construction management degree, working for Roland, working with us at Monte Lucia, having the builder mindset for so many years early on in your career, to how that's impacted you now as business owner and in the design world?
I learned a lot of valuable lessons really early on. Trying to build a bathroom from a description on a napkin is really, really difficult. So having accurate information early in the process, when you're trying to bid off of plans and you're searching page by page, spending hours just trying to cross-reference to make sure you didn't miss anything, having a book that correlates and cross-references so that you can quickly find the information you need makes a drastic difference in being successful or not. And I was lucky working with you on Monte Lucia, but I was also working with Adam on a project down the street that Est Est was doing the design on. Being able to flip through the design book and find all the information quickly, it makes life a lot easier. And there's so many opportunities on a custom home for things to go sideways or to be missed or to go wrong. Anytime we can eliminate those opportunities for something bad to happen is beneficial to everybody on the project.
It's funny because I think back as you're sharing that information, just the translation, right, from construction or from design to construction. But I remember my hiring process specifically at Roland. I wasn't interviewed like a typical interviewee, right? So I come in for the interview, I sit down, and the owner at the time, who guy sits down and he's like, "Okay, Brad, I want you to build a schedule." And so he's just sitting there, and they had Microsoft Project at the time, so I built a schedule. And, and that was, he's like, "Okay, you're hired," and that was really my interview process. It was just kind of on the job, let's see if you can perform to what your resume says. And the reason I bring it up is because, with Blake, we're like, not that you weren't highly skilled and very intelligent and great communicator and all these things as a young student, but I remember specifically we had this huge problem of Cantera, right? We had, there's 34 custom homes on the property, and we had this huge boneyard of product. And we're
Yep.
like, okay, Blake, kind of here's your project, and speak to just that organization and how quickly you put that together.
I was tired of tearing out columns that were installed wrong. And so I came in on a Saturday. I did a physical inventory of every piece of Cantera in the boneyard. I built a spreadsheet in Excel. I walked all the houses to see what had been installed and was able to quickly identify that the supplier was sending us the wrong product and the installer wasn't reading the plans properly. And, came in the morning and sat down with you and with Michael and said, here's what we need to do to fix this. And I don't think we tore out another column the rest of that project. But it was just one of those things where that's one of two things at Monte Lucia that really made a big impact for me for my career going forward. Understanding the importance of paperwork and documentation to make sure that everybody knows and has clear expectations of what's going to happen is crucial. And the big issue on that specifically is there were so many changes that happened in the design process that there were multiple versions of documents. And so the supplier was sending material off of old purchase orders and old documentation, not the most accurate, up-to-date ones. But just a little bit of time in the planning process to make sure that everything's buttoned up makes all the difference in the world.
I'm glad you brought that up, because one thing that in my career I think most people can relate, where I've had the biggest challenges, is when the physical vertical construction doesn't match the drawings. And and one example I had early in my career, I mean, we were doing a project in Silverleaf, and case in point, right? We're operating on the 7th revision of construction drawings in the field. The framer had ordered trusses, and the truss company was working on revision 1. And so
Yep.
here you are installing this house and nothing lines up. And really, to your example, is that this is why QR codes are really important. I know that, we were fortunate to meet with some of your design team, but QR codes are so valuable because we can make sure we have the latest and greatest drawings. And to your point, Blake, when you don't have, when these projects are very complex that we do. And the reason why I'm such a proponent of design is because I know the alternative, right? I know what it's like at Monte Lucia, where the architect wasn't involved and we're trying to piece this together, you and I, and you're trying to figure out, just Cantera is one of multiple hundreds of items going into these homes.
Yeah.
And so as a builder, the cost, the time, the redos, I mean, this is why if you partner with great designers and great design firms, like me, my job as a builder is more efficient, it's more profitable, it's better communicative. I mean, you're avoiding all the pitfalls of normal construction.
My dad developed the spec book process that we use today back in the 80s, early 90s. And I've always said that I can tell the difference between a bad builder, a good builder, and a great builder by how many questions they ask me pre-construction based off the design book that we deliver. The guy who never looks at the spec book, there's going to be problems on the project. A good builder is kind of worried about what's coming on the next couple of weeks and is kind of looking ahead. And the great builder is pouring through that design book very early on, and he's able to make strategic decisions in the construction process before he's ever in the field, so that everything's going to run smoothly. We spend a ton of time documenting everything to try and create the opportunity for everybody to be successful.
So when you give that example, Blake, I mean, from maybe a designer perspective, what are you looking for from the builder architect? I mean, when they're pouring through the design book, what are you hoping that they catch or see?
A lot of times it's in the transitions of materials or when we're creating custom elements. A really simple example, we do custom ceiling designs all the time. And say the designer wants to do something with lighting to create ambiance. We don't want to see the lighting, so it's going to be indirect. And we need to build some kind of a pocket to hold the recessed lighting that's going to illuminate a wall that's textured or something. If you're not asking any questions about how this is coming together, that means that you're going to be asking those questions when we're in the field actually framing it. If we sit down well ahead of time, we start having conversations about how much space your electrician needs to get his fingers in there to install LED tape, or how it's going to be serviced down the road. We can have those conversations proactively before you're ever in the field, so that the actual drawings that finally get issued are reflecting how you're actually going to build it, and everybody's life is easier.
It's amazing. And so you mentioned your dad created this in the 80s. Maybe speak to, again, this is you're a young guy, Blake, so this is before your time frame. But knowing what you know from having your dad as a mentor, from some of the amazing designers, because in credit to you and your firm, some of the most skilled designers in town were all started their careers at Est Est. So
Yep.
what did the design industry look like back then, and why was it revolutionary what your dad was doing?
So our company was founded in 1959. We're the oldest design firm in town. And back in the 1950s, 60s, even into the 70s, a big part of what designers did was really just sourcing product. So the founders of Est Est would travel all over the world. They'd go out and they'd buy antiques. They'd bring product back here. Someone would hire them to design a home in Paradise Valley, and they're providing the furniture or having things made specifically for the home. As the industry started to change, as you moved into really the 80s and the 90s, this thing called AutoCAD came out. They had these computers that could actually do technical drawings instead of everything being drawn by hand. And the nature of communication changed drastically at that point in time. The next big shift didn't come until the 2000s when the internet really became prevalent. So what he did, he had a similar background to me. He took a lot of engineering classes, did construction jobs going up. He tried to design the book to organize information in a way that made sense for a contractor who's building the home. So our book is organized two ways. First is by material type. So when you're going through bids and you're working through your product types to call your subcontractors, our book is organized the exact same way. So when you need to call your tile guy, all the tiles listed together. When you need to talk to your cabinet guy, all the cabinet information is all listed together, and so on and so forth. Specialty metals, materials, etc. They're all grouped to make it easy to bid. And then the second part of the book is organized by room. So naturally, as you're building the home and you're walking a space and questions come up, what am I doing in this powder bathroom? Well, all of our information for the powder bathroom is then grouped together. And so he just created a system of documentation that was organized and consistent and tried to make it flow naturally as you would need it when you're building the home. I don't need drawings, for me personally. They're created so that the homeowner knows what's coming and the contractor can bid and then build the design faithfully and execute it in the field. So the process has not changed very much from us from a documentation standpoint over the last probably 35 years, once we kind of iron out those kinks.
I love the example of the categorization. The reason being, I remember in college, I was taking, I think it was just an English class, like it was one of my general ed classes. And for one of our projects, the professor had asked us to write directions, right? They're like, you can do it. I believe we all had the same task, and you had to write directions to how it'd be done. And it was interesting how a lot of times, if you buy, IKEA furniture is pretty straightforward because it's, manufactured. But like there are some, it's, holidays, right? You and I have kids.
Putting together a basketball hoop.
Yeah. So some of the kid stuff we put together, some directions are great and some are terrible. And it makes it really hard to take what the manufacturer, what their understanding of the product was and how we put it in, from the installer aspect. It makes it hard that, things are lost in translation. And when you're doing that yourself, you're like, oh, okay, I see how difficult it is to put this in writing. And, for you from the designer side, there's a cost to that. There's a commitment, there's time, there's effort, there's education, there's a lot of things that go into put a design book together. But the end result is, again, one of the most difficult things as a designer is you're sitting in all these meetings. You have the vision, you have the customer's vision. You're putting this on paper, hoping that this builder is going to interpret that and actually execute what you have designed.
One of our core values is collaboration. And one of the things that I preach to our team constantly is to bring the people into the conversation who are actually going to be building your design while you're in the design development phase, so we can have proactive communication and collaboration so that when those design drawings are issued, it's not a surprise to the person receiving them. You can, as a builder, can be a part of the conversation as we're creating these drawings to make sure that what we're delivering to you is buildable.
I love that you do that. And I'll give you credit that not very many designers are as communicative and involving the general contractor throughout the design process, which you do. And it just makes that process much better. I mean, the categorization to me, it seems simple in itself, but the reality is these homes are very complicated that you're designing, Blake, and that we're building. And so it is really easy for a trade partner of ours to go through, a 200-page design book and miss details, to miss certain elements, and to have, an index, if you will, of all the metalwork. Well, it
Yep.
makes it a lot easier to reference that so they don't miss something on one of the pages of plans.
The designer spends so much time and effort, and they put their heart and soul into designing these houses, and there's nothing more frustrating for them than to have to compromise on design intent because something was missed in the planning phase. And you get up against it, and oh, we have 3 weeks to figure out how we're going to finish the space, and there's not enough time to get the product that was specified. Um, by us taking the time on the front end to make sure that it is all correlated and cross-referenced, it makes it a lot easier to ensure that details aren't missed. It's in our best interest, not just yours, to make sure that it's all laid out that way, because it helps to make sure that what we've put the time and effort into can actually be built.
What about the collaboration? I mean, we've been speaking about the collaboration with construction and design. What about the architecture side?
Oh, we'd love to get started super early. As soon as the architect is putting together the first set of plans in front of the client, we'd like to be involved in the meetings. Not because we're necessarily influencing things at that point, but because it helps us to understand the whys behind the way the home is laid out the way that it is. When we design a house, it's not an ego process for us. It's really about creating the best space possible for the homeowner. So the more insight we can get into why it's coming together the way that it is, the easier it is for us to collaborate and all be on the same page. We work with all different architects. They all have different things that they're passionate about, strengths and weaknesses. And we kind of feel like it's our responsibility to be flexible from job to job to kind of fit the scope that's needed. Some architects get far more involved when it comes to ceiling designs and fireplaces. Others design just the shell and kind of step back. And so we really try and collaborate to fill those gaps so that there's not holes in scope on the project team.
I think what's interesting about the architectural side is, in my experience, it's been fairly rare, except for Tony and Blake with Est Est, and any designers I work with that had grown up in the Est Est organization right before they left on their own. And what I'm specifically speaking about is lighting. Like, I know how passionate you guys were about lighting and placement, and maybe that education just for that value add of what it looks like, how important lighting can be in the home.
You can spend millions of dollars building a house and put the most unbelievable things in it. And if you don't light it properly, you're never going to appreciate it. Lighting is one of the most important things that we do in our project. It's what really creates the ambiance and the mood from space to space. And the choices of lighting will drastically impact how those spaces live. So we start at the very beginning with the architect when we're talking about, just structured lighting and where cans are going to land. And we feel like it's really important for us to do a preliminary furniture plan so we can make sure things are just placed properly. But then when you start to get into the nitty-gritty details of the decorative fixtures and the character, it makes all the difference in the world.
So as you're looking at, we touched on, your involvement with the architect, with the contractor, not with the client. What are some of the expectations that you are trying to set from a business development side to make sure that you have a very, cooperative, collaborative experience with the client?
As far as with the other members of the project team or with the client?
Well, I just mean you specifically. When a client's working with Est Est specifically on the design, look, there's expectations, right? I look at, for me, whether it's schedule, whether it's budget, whether,
sure,
the emotional roller coaster of building a home. There's these pitfalls that come through every time. So what are some of maybe the challenges you've seen in the past with clients, and, how do you set those expectations up front so you don't do that again?
Some of the first questions we always ask the client is like, why are you buying this house, or why are you building this house? The answer to that question will address or help you go down the right path more often than not. Some people are buying a home and it's going to be their forever home. Other people, it's an investment that they're going to be in for maybe 3 to 5 years, and then they're going to move. Some people in our industry, as you know, buy and flip houses frequently. Understanding the why behind the house helps to kind of guide you down the right path for all those other questions you're going to follow. If it's a property that's going to be a 3 to 5 year investment and they're probably moving again, our decision matrix that flows from that is far more heavily impacted financially than it is necessarily functionally, if that makes sense. But if someone's going to be in a home and their plan is going to be here for 20 to 30 years, well, then we don't have to worry so much about the short-term investment. It's going to appreciate over time, over that period of time, that it's not really going to matter so much. And we can really focus on how to best customize it to fit their needs. So we first ask the whys. Why are you going to be in this house? How are you going to use it? Do you have kids? Do you have grandkids? Do you entertain? Are you private? Those kinds of questions kind of help us to set expectations for what they're looking for the home. And then anytime, the hardest thing is not necessarily budget for us, believe it or not, it's really schedule. How quickly can they be in the home? We've had some challenging situations in the past for that. And it really just comes down to clear communication, understanding what their goals are, what their needs are, and seeing if you can put together a plan in place that will to meet their challenges. Fastest timeline for me, we had a project once upon a time. Architect came to us, had a client in Vancouver, Canada, who wanted to furnish their 10,000 square foot house by Christmas. And he contacted us around Halloween. And I said, yes, we can make it happen if. And I laid out a series of things that had to happen to make it even possible to get stuff selected through customs and installed in time. And I said, we'll do this project for you if you can commit to doing these things on these days. And they did. And so we made it happen. But it just comes down to clear communication, understanding what the challenges are going to be. If you choose financial as opposed to time, then you have conversations about budget with the builder and the architect, and we all sit down around the table. We talk about what their expectations are as far as finishes go and size of the home, and we make sure that things are in alignment before we ever get started, because the last thing you want to do is promise someone something and spend 6 months, a year going through design phase, and what you put in front of them is never going to get built because it doesn't meet their needs.
It's a really tough balance. And the reason I bring it up, because whether us as the builder, you as a designer, Blake, you bring up some good examples about the why, not just from, is this an investment property, to, is this going to be our end all be all, or at least quotation marks, our forever home, which typically never ends up being the case.
Yeah.
We know how that goes. But the reason I bring it up is because our build times can be long. I mean, you could have projects that are 2 years in design, take 3 years to build. These are 5-year projects. And so you're looking at, okay, if we're designing all these kids spaces who are in 7th grade and they may have a certain taste and now they're going to be seniors in high school, it changes that. Or are we designing stuff that they're going to be out of the home and now they're coming back, with potentially in college, or are they coming back eventually married with grandkids? And so it can really impact, especially people with families, like what that design looks like from, what's exciting today to what the reality is when they move in.
I give a talk with realtors fairly frequently, and it's called being timeless and timely, not trendy. And what you're talking about is the exact reason for that. I get asked frequently, like, what are current design trends? What should we be worried about? And unless you're flipping a home and trying to sell it in the next 3 months, you really shouldn't be worried about design trends. You should worry about designing something that's going to be timeless. When you're designing for young kids, it's a very different situation than if you're designing for teenagers, which is a very different situation for college age kids, which is very different than grandkids. So understanding where people are at in life makes a big difference. But there's things that we can do to make the home timeless, and it can transition over time to meet those different needs generationally.
How do you gauge, and I don't want to say vet clients, or not that it's a red flag, because you have some high profile clients that are busy. They have businesses, families, a lot of, our clients have secondary homes here, so availability can be limited. How are you gauging just clients' ability to communicate, their availability for decision making? How does that impact you at call it pre-construction, pre-design?
So I think one of the strengths of what we do here at Est Est is our flexibility when it comes to that kind of communication. One of the questions I get asked often is, like, how long does it take to go through the design process? My answer is, depends on the client. We have some clients move very, very quickly. The largest house we've ever designed, we put together the design book in like 6 to 9 months.
And you've done some big houses.
It was 24,000 square feet.
That's insane.
I've also had projects that are 3,000, 3,500 square feet, and it took like a year and a half to put together a design book. The reality is we're flexible. We shape our communication process with the client to match them and their needs. So if a client likes to text, we'll text. If it's email communication, we email. We always back everything up with email and documentation to make sure that everybody on the team is on the same page. But we adjust our schedule and our pacing and our processes to meet their needs. Some clients have a super short attention span, and it's like, hey, you got me for 45 minutes, and then my brain's going to shut off and I got to go do something else. No problem. We'll structure our meetings in smaller bites and phase out over time to make sure that they're comfortable. Other ones are like, hey, I'm going to be in town for like 3 days. We got to knock out like as much as we possibly can, and then I'm going to be gone for the next 4 months. So we'll structure our stuff around 3 days of cramming through everything. We prep them ahead of time. We have everything laid out. We choreograph a couple of days to hit important meetings that require them to be in person, and then the rest of our communication is long distance. We adjust what we do to match what the client's needs are, which I have the flexibility to do that because of how we're structured. I know that's not possible for everybody, but um, the communication with the client and how they communicate is less of an issue for us than most other things that we deal with.
I think what's interesting when you bring up, I don't want to say attention span. The reality is these are very complex projects. It's, for you that's doing it every day, for myself, it's easier to sit in these and understand visually what it'll look like. For a client that's not, it's a little bit harder to visualize. And I know you're implementing renderings and other things to help them with that.
If you asked me to sit down and look at fabrics for half of a day, my eyes would glaze over after like 20 minutes. It's not an indictment on the client. It's just a reality.
Yeah.
And we try and have that kind of communication to make sure that we can make it as easy for them as possible,
Yeah.
We just try and have a lot of conversations early on in the process, and we'll adjust as we're going if we need to make it more comfortable for them. Some are very visual. Some want to touch things in person. Some just want to see, renders and pictures. We adapt based on what the needs are.
Now, how about and the reason I bring up, and it may not be attention span or interest, as you mentioned, fabrics is a good example where you're like, hey, if it comes to other FF&E, other furniture, lighting, I'm all in, but fabrics, I'm like, you've lost me in 10 minutes. What about now? I mean, the good, the bad, the ugly of social media. Right now you mentioned timeless design, that you're trying to create designs that are timeless. Knowing that you're not going to be in your house for 2 years, 3 years, whatever the time is. From when these selections are made. What about clients that are coming in and saying, okay, Blake, I just saw this laundry room. Blake, I just saw this kitchen, right? And they're seeing stuff on Pinterest and House and Instagram. And how does that influence your ability to be able to keep this project on the tracks?
There's different levels of designers, is I guess the best way I can put this. There's some designers who people call decorators. They go and they meet with people and they go and retail shop together and they kind of pick out accessorize and they worry about, getting set up for Christmas or Easter, the different holidays. There's others that are on Pinterest and that's what they're using for their inspiration points as they're putting designs together. What we do is very different than that, if that makes sense. We treat images that the client brings us from Pinterest just like we would have from back in the day when people actually open up magazines and tore out pictures of things that they liked. For us, it's a starting point. One of the things that's another one of our core values is originality. We'll take all that kind of information as feedback as a starting point for design, but then we're going to create something that's custom that meets all their needs. And there's so much data that has to go into the design process to give the right output for the client that the Instagram pictures, whether it's the laundry room or the dining room or the fun things they saw, it's just one of many things that are factored into what's the right design for that client. But we encourage it. The picture is worth 1,000 words is very, very true. Client comes to us and says, hey, I like contemporary design. Well, that could mean a million different things.
For sure.
Images help us to start to narrow down what it is that they like, what they're attracted to. And a lot of times they'll pull a picture and they'll say, hey, I love this dining room. But there may not be a single thing in that picture that they actually want in their house. They just like the way it feels. Mm-hmm. So we encourage that kind of stuff because it's really healthy communication, but it doesn't really factor too much into us because we're not copying what we see in the picture. It's just kind of a starting point for conversation.
I love that because to your point, they may not even know what they like in the picture. You mentioned comfortability or layout or maybe proportion, color scheme, whatever it may be. But, we all have different definitions. I think that the contemporary to modern is a good example because their modern is different than what you're thinking for modern.
Yeah. I mean, contemporary to one person could mean just not super traditional.
Yeah.
Another person, it could mean steel and glass and concrete.
Yeah.
The terminology is so difficult that we try and just move past it and start to get into images. And one of the big meetings that we do with clients, I call it the litmus test. We lay out a huge conference room table with materials. We just want them to touch and feel stuff. And in that process, we find and discover a lot of things that are really, really interesting. I had a client a couple of years ago. She didn't know it until we sat in that meeting that she hated things with like a glossy texture. She didn't want to touch the products that were glossy. We had no idea. She didn't know until she started to look at it, and everything that had gloss on it, she didn't want it. She hated it. Doesn't hurt our feelings. It just helps us discover together what she likes and doesn't like as we go through the evolution of design.
And it's such a professional, mindset. The reason, all the successful designers are like, finishes don't have feelings. Like they just, it's just, you don't take it personal. It's like, okay, move on to the next, check this off. You don't like it. It's just, you're trying to create the best vision for the client you can without getting emotionally attached.
Yeah, I mean, we want our designs to be beautiful, obviously, but the most important thing to me is that the client loves their space. So you're never going to hurt our feelings by not liking a product, and I'm not the one who made it. Most of the most beautiful stuff we use is all natural. It's carved right out of the earth.
Mhm.
Let's find the stuff that you like the best. Let's make sure that the application is going to make sense for how we want to use it, and let's rock and roll.
What are some of the call it difficult transactions, communication with certain builders? Not that you're going to call out any builders, but as you think back to your experience, maybe there are some builders that are better than others. Why? You mentioned the design book. You can tell how experienced they are just by going through the design book. But what about as you get into vertical construction?
Well, let me start off by saying there's a drastic difference between new construction and remodels. It's a totally different process doing one versus the other. I think that the things, they sound so basic, but it's so true. Scheduling is huge. There's a lot of builders who struggle because they can't communicate a construction schedule to the client, so there's not clear expectations of what's going to be coming and when. The most frustrated client is the one who thinks that their house is going to be done in October and it's really not done until April. Um, Scheduling is huge. I think that a lot of the problems that happen on the project are from poor planning. So the client falls in love with, this happened recently. Client fell in love with the tile floor, but it had like a 5.5 month lead time to get it. Well, we specified it like 9 months before they needed it. Product didn't get ordered in time. So we're 2 months out, and the builder goes, "Hey, we need to specify a new tile. We can't get this product in time." That's really frustrating for the client. It's really frustrating for the designer who's designed this entire space around this specific tile. It's just a communication and a planning thing. The reason why I say I can tell the difference between a great builder, a good builder, and a bad builder from the delivery of the spec book is because a lot of these things, it's not that they didn't have the information, it's that they didn't do anything with the information that they had. That makes sense. But it's just a communication thing. Ask questions if you're not sure about a product or how we're trying to use it or why. If you're concerned about an application, and we do stuff that has never been done before, we should be having conversations about how do we want to make this work. It's just a planning thing. We want to make sure that you're successful too. So if there's an issue, let me know. Let's work together to find a solution.
I love that you bring that up because, not only through the podcast, but just as I communicate with designers and architects, behind the scenes, and I'm always curious, from their perspective, what makes builders different, right? And the common theme from every architect and designers, which you broke down, Blake, is that, it's this theory that, the good builders are going through either the architectural plans and they're finding details that they may have built before, maybe they haven't built them before. These could be stem wall footing details, it could be, fireplace transition details, the firebox, and the point is, it's not that the builder is finding issues or discrepancies, but they're asking questions on really insightful elements of design that you've thought through, Blake, that the architects thought through. And you're catching those and saying, "Hey, I want to make sure I execute this detail. Am I doing this right? Are we contracting this right with our trade partner?" And that's where it's separating. And they're seeing that, okay, this builder is in tune. They've read the book. They know the details. They've memorized the plans. They know exactly what they're building.
Yeah, you're 100% correct. It's a lot of time it's just about synchronizing events to come together in the proper order so things happen the way that they're supposed to. We have a custom sink design that's got a fabric inlaid in the glass. You got to have conversations with all the people involved. You may look at me and go, "How the hell are we going to do that, Blake?" And I'm going to say, "I've got this guy who can do this for you." And the resources in the spec book, it's got the person to call to make sure this is going to come together. Then we sit down and have a meeting from fabrication to figure out how to make it all come together so that it looks flawless at the end of the day. But we encourage those questions. And when we propose things sometimes that are a little out of the box, it should require conversation and communication. And that's why we want to bring in all the experts in the different disciplines to make it happen.
I love you bring the sequencing because you mentioned the schedule and how crucial that is. I mean, from your perspective, you're not managing the schedule. You're not building the home yet. You have to do a lot of the finishes at the tail end, from probably drapery and mirrors possibly and many other details, plus furniture that you're have carrying costs. Yeah. wall coverings, all those elements to a build. So the schedule impacts you, and yet the sequencing. If a builder's asking you about sequencing and phasing of the design element of the construction schedule to the architect, it helps you be in tune at least that, okay, this builder knows what they're doing, and so I can trust timelines that they're going to be giving me and the client.
We want to plan. We order furniture, and depending on the client, some stuff is available really quickly. We can have stuff in 4 to 6 weeks, but a lot of times, the frame is coming from Brazil and the fabric's coming from France, and there's components from all over the world that I'll have to land at a custom upholsterer who's going to put the piece together. And for me to know when we need to pull the trigger on that to get the process started so it's ready when the house is done requires communication with the contractor on how's it going, what are we looking at schedule wise. It's just a communication thing. And when you start to factor in custom built-ins and different pieces, and maybe we're trying to get here's a good example. We had a bathtub that we were putting in a house that required a crane to get it into the bathroom. Okay. So the bathtub had to be craned in during frame stage, and then the rest of the bathroom had to be built around it. Sequencing is really important to make that happen. It just requires communication to make those things happen.
It's funny you bring that up because I know you're speaking about a different project, but we specifically had a project with Est Est many years ago at the Chateau in Central that had a very heavy tub that we actually had to set at frame stage as well.
Yeah.
Through the window of, this 4-story brownstone in downtown Phoenix. And it had to be set and ordered and set in place so that we could crane it into position once, we were at that, that stage.
Yeah. It's just communication is everything, right? And we're not production builders, and that you're building the same house over and over and over again. Every single one of these houses is a one-off. Every one of them is custom. So you have to spend a lot of time on the front end planning as a team together so that you can make the actual construction process and finish as seamless as possible.
Now, from just an operator standpoint, Blake, one of the questions I often get asked by the listeners is whether it's designers, children taking over their parents' design company, whether it's architects taking over their parents' architecture firm, and especially contractors taking over their parents. Their parents have their way of operating. The kids come in. How was that transition, especially over time? Of course, when you came, had left Monte Lucia with us, go to Est Est, and I know that your role has changed over time to now.
Sure.
You're operating the company. Walk through maybe just that handoff to. And the reason I bring it up, you guys are at the forefront of design. I mean, you mentioned that to Tony early on, but here comes Blake that fully understands CAD. He's young, he's technology savvy, and so it's this integration of this generation, that crossover.
So when I transitioned over to Est Est, my initial role was, director of operations. And the reality is I spent the first couple of years really just trying to learn the other side of the table. I'd spent time on the construction side, building houses, working from spec books, looking at plans. But I wanted to really learn how the designers function. What are their pain points? What makes their life easier? What makes their life more challenging? Before I changed or tried to change anything at all. I think one of the strengths that I inherited from Dad with the business was how organized the information was on the construction documentation standpoint. One of the areas that I found still a little more like the wild, wild west was how we controlled information on the furniture side of things when we were tracking paperwork and orders. And just like we talked about with Cantera columns and having structured information organization, one of the things that I endeavored to do was to bring order to the chaos in the ordering process. And it's difficult because you're talking about ordering from hundreds of different vendors and products from all different countries all over the world. How do we put together a process that tracks all that information to give us the best opportunity to be successful for our client? And so I went into that mindset and kind of worked with my design team to talk about what works and what doesn't work for them. And we've developed a process that, today I can pull out my phone and I can pull up any piece of furniture for a project that's coming up and see every purchase order acknowledgement, the timeline of who's going to touch it, when, where it's going. It's just processes. It's not reinventing the wheel. It's refining it, if that makes sense. As I look to the future, one of the things that we started implementing in the last year or two was photorealistic renderings, not just building a model in SketchUp, but creating an image that you, as a homeowner, as a consumer, can't really tell the difference between my image that I've created, the rendering, and what the finished product is going to look like. Um, I'm really happy because just this last couple of weeks, we actually photographed the first house that had gone through that process. And so I can put together my rendering side by side with the finished photography, and you can see the exact same fabrics, the exact same pieces of furniture. It's really neat. But I think that the implementation of technology is just helping us to kind of elevate the client experience, make them more comfortable in the design process, help to really manage expectations of what's to come, and it helps you as a builder to have a clear vision of what the space is supposed to look like at the end of the day. The more that we can do to implement those things in our design process, the easier it's going to be for everybody.
Do you feel that those renderings, not only from a communication aspect, and it's again, like there's no incentive for you to upsell the client, like there's just really not, but how does that play a role in the design? Because they are investing a lot of money in the product and the construction, how does that maybe help them sign off on what you've put together?
Well, it does a couple of things. One is it creates excitement. So you've spent a year, sometimes two, going through this design process where you're picking out materials and you're looking at different drawings and elevations. And to be able to see a photorealistic image of what that space is going to look like, it's exciting for the client at a time when they've probably hit some fatigue in the design process to be happy to write that check to their builder to go and order those materials and get the construction started. We do it a lot in complicated areas. To me, like the poster child are staircases. So if you try and show someone complicated stairs in 2D with CAD drawings, vast majority of people have no idea what they're looking at. If I can render that space so they can see an image of what it's going to look like, it's like the light bulb goes off and they feel really comfortable and they're happy to move forward. We do it for homeowners frequently. It happens after constructions or after design has completed, but before construction has started typically, because we have to figure out what all the details are going to be before we can render it. But we also do it for spec builders. So you're building a spec house. I can put together a photorealistic rendering of what the space is going to look like. And now you can go and start marketing your property before construction ever starts. And it's not just a lookbook of materials. It's an actual, fairly realistic photograph of what the space will look like. It's going to be a big part of what happens in the future in design.
That's incredible. I mean, it just, to your point, I mean, especially for a spec builder, I mean, it adds so much value, right? As they're trying to pre-sell and maybe not take a lot of the risk and get the clients the vision. How do you, from just an owner, operator, entrepreneur mindset, it's easy for, creative time can be difficult. It could be difficult to create. It could be difficult to come up with new concepts. How are you instructing your designers, to prioritize tasks? How do you work through that aspect of, as we know, contractors could be calling all day with a million questions because they haven't read the plans. You have, clients that may be pulling on time. So how do you prioritize your day?
I give our designers ultimate freedom to shape what their day looks like. I don't micromanage what their schedule is going to be at any given point in time. There are things that I preach and communicate because I think that they're incredibly important for us being successful. First and foremost is proactive communication. If you're contacting your client every single week to let them know what we've been working on and what's coming up, they're not wondering what's happening in the design process. If you fully book out your day from 8 in the morning until 5 o'clock at night and leave no time for the things that are going to pop up in the day, you're not going to be successful. You have to leave some time or schedule some tasks that are flexible because things happen. So there's a balance between flexibility and rigidity and structure that I think is really important. But the reality is that every one of my designers is different. They have different strengths and weaknesses, and they operate better, or differently, I guess, than each other. So they have the freedom to shape those kinds of things. We just try and help make sure that they're on track, if that makes sense, moving in the right direction. Lynette is our design director, so she oversees the design team, and she's working with people on what deadlines they have coming up and what priorities are, so we can manage those things. But the reality is, like, if I get a phone call from a client that says, "Hey, I'm going to be in town on Tuesday. I need to be able to meet to do X, Y, and Z," like, we got to be flexible to adjust, to circumstances that arise. If I get a call from the builder that says, "Hey, I have a problem. Can you come out to the job site and solve this?" My answer can't be, "I'll see you on, next Friday." I got to, adjust my schedule to make those things work. So it's a balance. To me, it's about being proactive in communication to try and minimize how many of those kinds of things will pop up. The reality is, if we do our job really, really well in the front end of design, there are far fewer questions and issues that pop up in the field during construction. So there's less chaos in our day, if that makes sense. Um, but it's just balancing, working hard and not procrastinating on tasks to do it when you have the time, so that when something does pop up that's an emergency, you have the flexibility to address it.
It's amazing. As you think about legacy, what does that mean to you?
It's all about people more than anything else. I look at college football, right? And a great college football coach, he's got 10 other coaches that are out there that he's competing against that used to work for him, that he trained and taught up, and you learn about the coaching tree. Well, to me in design, it's the same thing. You've mentioned a couple of times that there's a whole lot of people in our industry that were raised and taught by Est Est and how to do what we believe is things the right way. And then they've gone off and been successful on their own. And to me, that's like really exciting. I feel like I'd rather compete against people who do a great job and share common values than against people who are, working out of their truck or, making stuff up as they go. It's better for the entire industry to have higher standards. But to me, legacy is all about people. We spend a whole lot of time investing in the people that we work with, not just in-house, but the builders and architects that we interact with, the trades and subcontractors. And the more that we can do to help other people be successful and to, change lives, the better.
I love that. I love the legacy side because it's easy to say that, I think, in paper. Like, I think it's easy to say, well, we're confident in our brand. We have a mentality of abundance, not scarcity. The coaching tree, I think sports is a great example because you see some of the most talented coaches, right? They come from the same coaching tree and they spread out and now they're competing right
Yeah.
against their former mentor or boss, if you will. But in credit to you guys, Blake, as I mentioned, Arizona, Scottsdale specifically is littered with exceptional design firms that all came from Est Est, right? And you've still created an incredible name that hasn't changed, incredible brand and product. And yet you have some that you may or may not compete against, but are fulfilling that legacy, that are still anyone that comes from the Est Est coaching tree. I know from a builder perspective, their design book is going to be second to none. And my own team compliments how good these design books are.
It's little things, right? So, I can look at architecture and I can say, like, the most influential architect in Phoenix, Paradise Valley is George Christensen. And the reason why is because if you look at all of the prominent architects today, like 80% of them worked for George. He mentored people. He taught them how to do things the right way. And his legacy will live long past his time, that he had as an architect. But to me, it's done in the little things. It's not even just in the business, day to day. I got a call from a kid that I actually was his basketball coach back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
I coached freshman basketball for a couple of years, and he said, "Hey, Coach Sutton, can we grab a beer and chat?" Sure, no problem. I went down to Tempe, and we sat down and had a beer. And he goes, "Hey, my girlfriend is thinking about going into interior design. Can you give me some feedback on what I should be looking for, what's important, so I can talk to her about it?" I'm happy to have those conversations because to me, it's that's the next person that could be making a difference in our industry. So I have conversations about the strengths and weaknesses of programs and, what you can be doing to build your career and to strengthen yourself and to better yourself so that when you get through college, you're in a position to be successful. We pour into the community colleges, SEC is where we hire most of our designers from when they're students. The other is ASU. We do internships. We bring in, 3-4 interns every single summer. We meet with people. We give them true on-the-job training where they can work on projects and see what this industry is really all about and help them to be successful. And some of them stay and some of them go off on their own and some of them decide that design's not for them. But the reality is that we're happy to share and train the next generation because it's crucial for all of us to be successful.
I love that. So what do you have that's upcoming and exciting?
We just got a new contract for some golf villas in California. That'll be super fun.
Awesome.
That's something we're doing with Swaback that I'm pretty excited about. I've got 3 or 4 custom homes I can't really talk about at the moment that are that we're excited for. One of them would be incredibly significant. I have a new community, so we're working with Norwest Development to do a new community up in the Troon area. There's 21 houses. Community's called Serene. The models are installing tomorrow and Wednesday, and the grand opening is on Thursday. So that's pretty exciting. Uh, we do a variety of kinds of projects, from commercial and hospitality, primarily residential. But to me, the excitement is about diversity. I've got one project that's a Tudor style building. I've got one that's French country. I'm doing a super Santa Fe style remodel. I'm Arizona Ranch, lots of contemporary. So to me, like, the diversity in design is one of the things that's truly unique to the Valley here that you won't find probably anywhere else in the world. And one of the things that's exciting to me is that every house is so different. There's so much room for creativity. It's not the same stuff over and over again.
It's incredible. Best advice you've been given?
Best advice I've been given. I think it's really just to invest in people. People. When you invest in people, you're never going to regret it. Whether it's the people that you're working with that are underneath you, whether it's your colleagues that are alongside you, whether it's your kids, whether it's investing in people, it's never a bad investment.
Oh, I totally agree. I mean, look what you've done. I mean, again, you and I were invested in, and look what we became, and you've invested in so many in this community. As we close here, Blake, and you've been incredible. I just appreciate you making so much time for us today. What do you do for fun?
I love to read. As you can see, I have a couple of books behind me.
You have a lot behind you.
I really enjoy reading. I love sports. Basketball, football are my favorites. I play video games. I'm kind of a nerd in that way too. I love strategy games. Just try and see the big picture, and I like to compete. But mostly, honestly, I go to work all day. I come home. That's like halftime, the drive home. I love to spend time with my kids and my family. So Jackson, my son, is playing lacrosse for the first time, and so he's got some games this weekend that I'm really looking forward to. My girls are super unique. My oldest loves gardening and is incredibly creative. My youngest is into music and plays the flute. So, I love just spending time with the kids.
Yeah, it's awesome. And you guys aren't afraid to travel with little kids either.
Not at all. It's one of the best things you can do is travel with kids and give them experiences. Mm-hmm. Experiences are far more valuable than stuff. So anytime we can do stuff with our kids and go and experience new things, we try and do that.
Yeah, it's awesome. I love it. Well, Blake, you've been incredible. I appreciate the friendship, and
of course.
All that you've done for the industry. So where can our listeners find you?
Our website is a great place to pop in just to see our work, estestinc.com. We're located by the Scottsdale Corridor. You're always welcome to pop in and come say hi, give you a kind of tour of our facilities and how we do stuff. Facebook and Instagram, it's Est Est Inc.
Amazing. Well, thank you, Blake.
Perfect. Thanks, Brad.
If you get value from the show, please support us by giving a 5-star rating and review on whatever platform you listen to. And I also have a favor to ask. We've had some incredible guests that come on and share their wisdom, their knowledge about their business. So if you have friends or family members that could benefit from those episodes, please share it with them, as well as any other business owners that you're networking with that could get value from the podcast or certain episodes. Please share those as well. Again, subscribe, make sure you're following. Any questions that you have, topics. We've had listeners reach out about certain guests that we should have on the show. Again, brad.l@aftconstruction.com. Email me for topics to address, guests that we should have on, and even if you think you'd be a great guest for the show. So again, thank you for all your support, and we'll see you next time.